Hi, I'm Kate Powers, and I wanted to talk about why summer can be so tough on regulation and why transitions can be harder than we expect with our kiddos. Summer is supposed to feel like a break, but for many neurodivergent children and families, it's not very relaxing. When the school routines stop and our kiddos don't have a strict bedtime routine anymore or a regimented morning routine, all of the things that happen during the traditional school year, when vacations throw familiar rhythms into chaos, when even small transitions can cause meltdowns, full-blown, what seems like over-the-top meltdowns. And so I wanted to share some thoughts about that. And I just recently had an experience with my own kiddos who, are no longer young, who are 16 and 21, where I did find myself saying in my head, this was supposed to be fun. And while my son was not having a full-blown meltdown, I was questioning our choices. And so I thought it would be relevant to share some reminders, if you already know this information, or some, thoughts about what's really going on. And why transitions can trigger reactions, dysregulation, meltdowns. A lot of times transitions represent a loss in control or a shift in predictability. And for some of our kiddos, that feels like a direct threat to their sense of safety. Even something fun, even something they want to do, something they wanted to happen, can feel overwhelming when they don't have the internal tools to manage the unknown. We recently did a family day at the New England Aquarium, right? And so we had a plan, everybody was on board. And when the reality of the situation was kind of hit us in the face when you walk in the door, it became very clear that it was overwhelming for my child, and that even though he is a person in a big body, he is still having struggles in unknown situations. So if you have a kiddo who struggles with sensory sensitivity, social anxiety, any type of communication challenge, any type of executive function difficulty, any type of neurodiversity, ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, any type of brain that is wired differently, they're going to be more vulnerable during times of transition. And it's why routines are so supportive. Having a regular routine supports regulation. And summer is notoriously a time of lack of routines. And so it makes sense that you would see an increase in dysregulation. So let's talk about that in a little more detail. For even when you use countdown timers, clocks, schedules, visual schedules, they might not be enough for a child whose nervous system is already overwhelmed, right? A lot of times we talk about dysregulation and meltdowns, and we use all these words. But the reality is, if a child's nervous system does not feel safe, if the brain, the subconscious brain, is on high alert, and the nervous system is overwhelmed, that child's not going to be able to stay regulated because their systems for regulation have shifted to fight, flight, fawn, to survival mode. And so before a child can self-regulate, and a lot of times they're not able to do this independently, they have to feel safe. And part of feeling safe is they have to have a trusted person that they know they can depend on when they're struggling the most. So they know, even if they're not able to communicate their needs, that their needs will be met and supported and understood. And this is all things that even as young adults are not able to be particularly articulated, especially in the moment, right? That the first thing to go is verbal communication, right? Because that's a frontal lobe type of activity, and they're functioning from the back here, right? From their lizard brain. And so, during unpredictable times for your child, right? Even though you know it's going to happen, even though you've made the plan, you've talked to them, it's been a group effort around planning, that doesn't mean you won't need a toolkit. It doesn't mean you won't need the bag of tricks that you usually bring, right? You're still going to need those. And it's important to remember that. Regardless of age. If even, like we didn't have headphones for my son, noise canceling headphones. And so we needed them, and we didn't have them. And it affected our day, and it affected our trip. So, remembering that even if things have been going well, grab the tools, make sure you have your strategies on hand. And so headphones, using music, using audiobooks, any type of auditory input that helps minimize the chaotic noise in the environment and is soothing, right? And it can change situation to situation. And so giving options, and even if they're visual cards, right? If it's a favorite audiobook story, when my kids were younger, we went right through the whole series of Magic Treehouse, right? And we do chapter by chapter. And that was a way to shift from something that feels unsafe and unfamiliar, right? The experience they're having in that moment, to something that was familiar and soothing. And that helps start regulation, whether it's calming music. If they're older, they can choose their own music. Luckily, in our recent experience, my son did have his earbuds, and so he was able to minimize the chaotic noise of the aquarium with music of his choice. And another option is, I'm a big fan of visual schedules, having a visual representation of what is coming up, right? Whether it's a week, 2 weeks, a month. I have a calendar on the fridge that's a family calendar. Now my kids are older and can understand how to read a calendar, but when they were younger, we did a daily calendar, what has to happen every morning, what has to happen after school. In the summertime, we would shift that into chunks of the day, morning, lunchtime, afternoon, evening. And so you have to just always be shifting the supports to support in the situation you find yourself in, right? And not forgetting to bring them with you, or making it up, right? Making a piece of paper that you put on the bedroom wall or on the fridge at the vacation house, at the place you're staying, in the hotel room on vacation. Another thing that has recently been brought to my attention from, or reminded of a strategy that I was recently reminded of, is having photos of loved ones, having photos of the child when they are having big, joyful, happy moments with the people they love and individually, right? Like if you have great photos from a vacation, from a day at an amusement park, from a day at the beach, whatever, happy, joyful, where you have photos of your child laughing, big, joyful, happy laughter, big smiles, right? Lots of positive energy. Put together a little photo album for them. You know, one of the little ones you can get at a drugstore, or you know, you can order them online, or you can print them at home, you know, depending on the kind of printer you have. And that, when you start to see your child rev up, when you start to see them disengaging in a calm regulation way, and then you start to see, we all know the signs, right? We watch their eyes, we watch their body language. When you start to notice a shift happening, that's a great strategy to have in the backpack. Hey, why don't we take a minute and let's look at your photo album and have a drink of cold water, right? That's another, having ice cold water on hand. Some kids won't drink ice cold water, fine, whatever works for your child, right? Comfort items, a little stuffy, fidgets, a weighted Snuggie, right? Something that you can put on the lap of your child while you're looking at the photo album. A 10-minute break can literally shift your entire day, and it's worth the 10-minute investment to be able to then enjoy the rest of your day with your family on your adventure. And sometimes kids need to, you know, we can get really caught up in the go, get every ounce of enjoyment and experience out of a day trip or a vacation, right? We've spent the money, we've done the work, we've done the research, and we want to just get everything we can out of it and have every possible experience. And sometimes we have to let go of those expectations, and we have to understand that the child in front of us they can't match our expectations. And one of the things I've done is planned strategic breaks in our day, right? We get someplace new. One of the things that's worked really well for us is immediately go to have a snack, and to have your child, whether they're 5 or 15, acclimate to the energy of the new space, right? And I'm not saying that in some, you know, kind of spiritual way, or I mean literally energy. When you walk into any space, the amount of movement and the amount of noise and the amount of sensory input creates an energy, right? It's part of why people like going to concerts or amusement parks or going dancing, right? There is an energy. There is a feeling, a vibe you get from these experiences, and that's a transition. So taking that 20 minutes, planning it into your day, going where it's a little quieter, where it's an opportunity to, you know, access some of the tools and strategies you have in the backpack, so that you all can enjoy your day more. Look at the map, grab one of the maps of the place that you're at, and while they have a fidget in their hand, right, you can be looking at and mapping out your experience. And that is a way, that's creating a visual schedule in the moment, right? That is creating the opportunity to share what happens next and what happens after that, right? And sometimes we don't think it should be necessary. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what we think. It matters what that child needs or what that young adult needs to feel safe in a new environment, in a chaotic energy, even if they've had an experience in the same place or same event previously. Still doesn't matter, right? And I like to think of it as building a bridge. A transition, a new experience, out of routine, those are all kind of like a black hole, right? They're a pothole on your day's journey. And so in order to successfully navigate that journey, you might need a bridge, right? Your child might need a bridge to navigate those potholes. And that's what we're really talking about, is providing the support necessary for regulation to come back, to stay, right? To just hold on a little tighter to that regulation. And one of the things that we often forget is our regulation matters. Our regulation, right? Our reaction to their emotional state has an immediate and immense impact. And so I talk a lot about co-regulation, and about taking care of ourselves so that we're in the space. We have the bandwidth to co-regulate. Because if we're frustrated and we start raising our voice, saying things like, well, can't you just, right? No, they can't, right? That is not a fair statement. That's like asking a fish to climb a tree, right? No, they can't. So don't say that. It's not helpful to anybody. If they could, they would. They're not having a good time in those moments, right? And I think it's really important for us to remember that. When a child is having a meltdown, when they are dysregulated and they don't even look like themselves in those moments, and we all have been there with our children, right? They're not having a good time. They don't like how that experience feels. They don't want to stay there. So if we can remember that, and we can come to the situation with understanding and compassion instead of frustration and anger, then we can be a tool for our child, right? And a child, young adult, doesn't matter, right? I'm using child kind of as a blanket identifier. If we're able to show up in a prepared for co-regulation, understanding that how we engage, how we interact. If we're frazzled, they're going to be frazzled. And so when we went to the cafe first at the aquarium, I got myself a coffee. We got drinks, we got ice water, I got coffee, we got a cookie, we got French fries, right? And we had a snack. And we took a minute, so that part of the chaos was there was a lot of groups from camps at the aquarium, which at summertime, that's to be expected. But that's to be expected basically everywhere you go, right? There's going to be big crowds. There's going to be wait lines for things. There's going to be noise. And so preemptively being prepared to take quiet breaks, right? Decompression breaks in places that don't necessarily have a sensory sensitive space. And understanding, a lot of times in the summer, we have these big expectations of high energy, even though it's a 95-degree day, even though it's humid, even though it's hot, right? And we're going to be walking around an amusement park all day, right? Or a new city all day. Yeah, the 5-year-old might need a stroller. They might need a buggy. They might need a cart, because it's a lot for an adult to be on their feet all day. It's even more for a younger child or a teenager or any person who's neurodiverse who has heat regulation issues, right? They feel the heat more. As a neurodiverse person, I am greatly affected by the heat. And I just, always just said, oh, well, I'm just sensitive to the heat. Oh, the heat bothers me. And I knew that about myself. But now understanding like, oh, this is actually a trait of neurodivergence. And so being more prepared for that, right? Having cooling neck towels, right? These are things that are easily available now. And they weren't 10 years ago, 20 years ago, right? They didn't exist 30 years ago in the same way. So using the tools, having a little fan, right? And so being okay with it not matching the ideal, quote unquote, highlights reel version. And it doesn't mean that you won't have a great day, right? It just means that living a neurodivergent, neurospicy life, right? Having a family, having a neurospicy household means you have to plan differently. And it takes extra planning. It takes effort to meet everyone's needs, right? And sometimes that means you split up. Sometimes that means that if there's 2 adults, you divide and conquer, right? And making sure you have things like sticker books, coloring books, whatever to go along with if you're going to be waiting in lines, if you're having experiences or waiting for restaurants, right? I'm in Boston. If you go to Cape Cod in the summertime, you can wait up to 90 minutes for a dinner table. That is an absolute nightmare for a child who struggles with transitions and waiting and is hungry and hot and tired. And so being able to understand what you need to show up with as the adult, right? And that sometimes you just need to let go of an expectation and focus on what really matters, right? That you got to spend time together. Maybe you don't plan. My children have never liked parades or fireworks. So I don't plan family activities that involve either of those things. Like I said, I live in Boston. We have fireworks every single year for 4th of July. We have a plan. My kids watch a loud movie. They watched Top Gun, the new Top Gun movie, this 4th of July, right? In a nice, cool basement space with a big screen and snacks. And so I set them up and we had a plan. And so that way they got to enjoy their version of a family activity while 4th of July is happening, which you can't avoid here where we are. And it's not necessarily something that they can manage and stay regulated in. So I invite you, if you have questions, if you'd like to talk more on this topic, to reach out. Kate Powers Creates at gmail.com. And I am happy to walk this journey with you. Thanks so much.